On May 9, 2015, a hulking silhouette rolled across Red Square and rewrote how the world imagined a tank. It looked wrong. The turret sat empty. The crew hid inside a sealed steel capsule up front. Western analysts stopped breathing mid-sip. This was the T-14 Armata, Russia's bet that the next war would be won by a machine that thinks, sees, and shoots faster than any human could keep up. From a stalled parade debut that nearly became a legend of its own, to phantom firing trials with no gunner in the turret, to whispered deployments in Syria and the Donbass, the Armata has spent a decade becoming a myth before it has fully become a fleet. Tonight, we walk through every mission this machine has been thrown into, the ones Moscow celebrated, and the ones it tried to bury. The Armata program began in secrecy at Uralvagonzavod in the early 2010s. Moscow wanted a clean sheet replacement for the T-72, T-80, and T-90 lineage. Every previous Soviet tank hid its crew inside the turret with the ammunition. That layout had killed thousands of crews from Chechnya to Iraq. The Armata's designers ripped up the rulebook. They pushed the entire crew into an armored capsule at the front of the hull. The turret above them would be unmanned, robotic, and remotely controlled through digital sights. The internal architecture routes every commander and gunner input through a digital fire control bus that treats the turret as an external sensor pod rather than a fighting compartment. In effect, the crew flies the tank the way a pilot flies a drone, watching a live feed of the battlefield rendered on hardened displays while the ammunition and guns sit meters away behind steel walls. On paper, this was revolutionary. But no one outside Uralvagonzavod had ever seen the vehicle move under its own power. Then came Victory Day 2015. 9 T-14 hulls formed up on Tverskaya Street before dawn. They rolled toward Red Square in a slow, deliberate column. Cameras from every major network locked onto the strange, flat turret and the low, wide chassis. Millions watched live. Then the lead Armata coughed, jerked, and stopped dead in the middle of the square. A recovery vehicle rushed in and hooked up the tow cable. It failed to drag the tank clear. For nearly 15 minutes, the future of Russian armor sat frozen in front of the world. Announcers on Russian state television insisted it was a scripted drill. Then the tank restarted on its own and drove off under its own power. The stall became a meme. The debut also became a warning. The West suddenly understood that a hunter-killer robotic turret had entered the parade ground, and no one knew how far the design had really progressed. The parade variant already displayed the finished Armata silhouette, a low, wedge-shaped unmanned turret carrying the 125mm 2A82 smoothbore gun, mass-mounted panoramic commander sight, side-mounted Afghanit active protection launchers along the turret cheeks, and a raised remote weapon station over the loader hatch position. Each of those features signaled a break from every Soviet tank that had come before. The world had seen the shell. It had not yet seen the ghost inside. Behind closed gates at the Kubinka training grounds, engineers had a problem. Skeptics abroad and inside Russia's own ministry doubted that a fully unmanned turret could survive real firing loads. A robotic turret sounds elegant until you fire a 9-kilogram sabot round at high velocity and the whole assembly shakes itself apart. The 2A82 1M smoothbore was one of the most powerful tank guns ever fielded. Its recoil would slam through the ring bearings, the ammunition carousel, and the digital sight stabilizers all at once. If the turret drifted even a fraction of a degree after each shot, the whole robotic concept would collapse. In 2016 and 2017, live-fire proof trials began at Kubinka and later at Alabino. The crew capsule stayed sealed. Not one gunner, commander, or loader was inside the turret. The tank rolled into the firing lane. The 2A82 barrel dropped level. The first sabot round left the muzzle at roughly 1,700 meters per second. The turret shivered, then relocked onto the next target through its stabilized sight. Round 2. Round 3. Round 4. Each impact shoot a fresh scar into the target array at 2,000 meters. Independent Russian defense reporters watching the footage noticed something even more telling. Between shots, the panoramic commander sight kept scanning while the gunner sight held the target. The Armata was doing hunter-killer engagements without any human physically inside the turret. Inside the fighting deck, the autoloader indexes 45 ready rounds inside an isolated compartment. Blowout panels vent any cook-off upward and away from the crew capsule, so a penetrating hit that ignites propellant does not chain detonate into the men. This is the same design philosophy Western tanks like the Abrams pioneered, but the Armata pushes it further by moving the humans entirely out of the turret ring. By the end of the trials, the concept had cleared its most brutal test. Robotic turret. Human crew alive up front. Gun still on target. If a robot turret could survive its own weapon, could it survive the enemy's? Modern anti-tank warfare no longer starts at the armor. It starts before the round arrives. Guided missiles, tandem warhead rockets, and top-attack munitions have made passive armor a losing race. Vaganzavad's answer was Afghanit, a hard-kill active protection system designed to shoot incoming threats out of the air before they touch the hull. Afghanit uses a ring of radar panels along the turret to detect an inbound projectile. Millisecond-scale processors compute the intercept vector, and short-range launchers fire a defensive round that either shreds the incoming warhead or knocks it off axis. On paper, it promised to make the Armata almost impossible to kill from a distance. Between 2017 and 2019, a series of controlled Afghanit intercept trials were staged at Russian proving grounds. In one demonstration, technicians launched a simulated tandem warhead round at a stationary T-14. The onboard radar cued the intercept. Defensive charge fired from the turret cheek launcher. Slow-motion cameras caught the flash. The incoming warhead detonated meters short of the hull. In another test, engineers modeled top-attack profiles similar to the Javelin missile threat. The Armada's upper hemisphere sensors tracked the diving trajectory. Ray-brimmed airburst charge released a curtain of fragments overhead. Analysts watching the released footage noted that the Afghanit system was designed to react in less than a tenth of a second. That is roughly the reaction time of a fighter pilot's ejection seat, but folded into a tank. To achieve that reaction speed, the Afghanit computer runs a dedicated threat library that classifies incoming projectiles by radar signature, closing speed, and approach angle. The slow, low-angle threat is treated as a rocket-propelled grenade, and the launcher's volley. A fast, high-angle threat is treated as a top-attack missile, and the airburst curtain is prioritized instead. By the end of the demonstration program, Russian defense media had a new phrase, the tank that shoots back before it is hit. But intercept trials happen on flat, dusty ranges. What happens when the Armata leaves the parade ground and goes toward a real war? By 2020, whispers began leaking out of Syrian air bases. Russian officials, always cautious with combat exposure of new hardware, began hinting that the Armata had been shipped south for evaluation. This was not full combat deployment. It was combat proximity. The Syrian theater had become Russia's live laboratory. Tu-35s had tested their radar there. Ka-52s had refined their attack tactics there. The T-14 would now log its first miles on a real battlefield, but under carefully controlled conditions. The goal was to gather thermal, electronic, and mechanical data outside the safety of a Ural test range. Deputy Prime Minister Yuri Borisov confirmed in the spring of 2020 that the Armata had been trialed under battlefield conditions in Syria. He did not name the operating base. He did not release footage. What he did say was blunter than expected. The tank had been used in Syria to gather combat experience, he told Russian media. Analysts pieced together the likely picture. The T-14 was moved through the Latakia airhead likely to Kamaim. From there, it operated on secured tank ranges near government-held zones, firing on captured hardware and possibly on marked target compounds. Its systems were exposed to dust storm ingestion, to real Syrian heat load, and to the electromagnetic environment of an active war zone with drones, jammers, and civilian communications overhead. Some Russian sources hinted that Armata sensors even tracked distant Islamic State vehicle movements to validate the fire control chain. No confirmed kill was ever released. But the tank came home with real-world telemetry, how the cooling loops handled desert heat, how the Afghanit radar behaved with civilian clutter, and how the digital sights performed at dusk over broken ground. Thermal management was a critical unknown. The unmanned turret is packed with electronics that dislike temperatures above 60 degrees Celsius. Syrian midday radiant loads regularly climb higher, and dust ingestion can choke intake filters within hours. The Syrian tour effectively became a heat and grit soak test that no Russian proving ground could replicate. The desert delivered data. Next arena would ask a harder question: could the Armata fight alongside the tanks it was meant to replace? By 2021, Russia had staged its largest Western military exercise in years, Zapad 2021. Held jointly with Belarus, the exercise pulled in tens of thousands of troops and hundreds of armored vehicles. This was the first time observers watched the T-14 operate not as a solo showpiece, but as part of a mixed armored formation. The Armata was expected to lead the Wolfpack. Its digital sights and network could see farther faster. Its Afghanit protection could screen the older T-72B3s and T-90 men's trailing behind it. In theory, one Armata could act as the Wolf, and a pack of legacy tanks could feed off its awareness. The Mulino training area, mixed tactical drills put the T-14 at the tip of the spear. The Armata pushed forward through simulated defensive belts. Its panoramic sight scanned overhead. Its gun engaged targets at long range while the T-90 men behind it maneuvered into flanking positions using its data. Russian defense observers described the pattern as hunter and hound. The Armata hunted. The older tanks moved on its call. Foreign attaches watching from the reviewing stand noted something else. The Armata rarely maneuvered under its own initiative. It waited for control cues from a network command vehicle, suggesting the tank was still being tuned as a node inside a larger digital battlefield rather than a lone predator. By this exercise, the Armata carried a mature package, the 2A82 smoothbore gun with autoloader, mast-mounted panoramic commander sight for hunter-killer engagements, Afghanit hard-kill launchers around the turret ring, Alakit dual-layer explosive reactive armor blocks on the hull and turret cheeks, and a network digital command link tying it into a battalion-level fire control mesh. Compared to the Parade Armata of 2015, this was a fighting vehicle, not just a silhouette. Wolf packs need real prey. 2 years later, the Armata would move even closer to one. The full-scale war in Ukraine had chewed through Russia's older armor at a pace no one predicted. Fields around Kherson and the Donbass held graveyards of burnt T-72s and T-90M. Pressure grew inside Moscow to demonstrate that the next-generation tank could actually fight. In early 2023, British defense intelligence and multiple Russian sources reported that a small number of T-14s had been deployed to positions inside Ukraine. It was not a mass commitment. Estimates put the number in the low single digits. The stated intent was reconnaissance by fire from standoff distances, supporting other units without exposing the Armata to close combat. The exact operational history of that deployment remains disputed. Russian sources at times boasted that armadas had fired on Ukrainian positions from ranges beyond 7 kilometers. British intelligence assessments countered that commanders on the ground were reluctant to expose the vehicles at all. Within months, further reports indicated that the T-14s had been withdrawn from frontline areas. Analysts pointed to several possible reasons. The tanks had not been fitted with the full production crew training pipeline. The digital sights and Afghanit system required specialist maintenance that a normal Russian tank regiment could not provide in the field. Losing even one Armata to a Javelin, an NLAW or a first-person view drone would have handed Kiev and its Western backers a propaganda victory of enormous scale. To operate the Armata under combat conditions, a crew must be trained on the sealed capsule, on the fully digital fire control interface, and on the Afghanit threat classification system. That training pipeline did not exist at scale in 2023, which meant every deployed T-14 effectively required its own trained cell of engineers and specialist operators near the front. A footprint no ordinary tank battalion can support. The Armata had touched the war. It had not truly fought it. If Ukraine exposed the weight of expectation on the Armata, the next chapter would ask whether Russia could still deliver at scale. By 2024, the Armata program stood at a crossroads. Rostec officials had publicly promised mass production. Vaganzavad insisted the assembly lines were spinning up. Independent analysts pointed to sanctions, chip shortages, and the diversion of every available industrial capacity to churn out reactivated T-72s and upgraded T-90s to feed the ongoing war. In parallel, Russian doctrine writers began sketching a future in which the Armata was less a single tank and more a platform family, including the T-15 heavy infantry fighting vehicle and various engineering variants, all sharing the same universal track chassis. The 2024 Victory Day Parade brought T-14s back to Red Square as headline vehicles once again. This time, no Armata stalled. The formation rolled through cleanly. State television spent minutes on the wedge-shaped turrets and the low silhouettes. Behind the cameras, however, the deeper story was industrial. Rostec announced that a batch of production Armatas had been delivered to trial units. Ministry officials talked openly about integrating T-14 alongside upgraded T-90Ms as part of a mixed formation doctrine. In parallel, engineers began studying an unmanned Armata variant, a fully robotic tank remotely controlled from a nearby command vehicle. Using the same crew-out-of-turret architecture pushed one step further. The 9-year arc from a stalled parade debut to a working platform family was, on paper, complete. Whether the platform could be delivered in the hundreds, not the dozens, was the real unanswered question. Even a fully mature Armata line depends on advanced Russian and previously imported electronics, thermal imagers, ballistic computers, radar processors, and stabilized site assemblies. Sanctions have squeezed every one of those inputs. Doctrine on paper often collides with production reality, and the Armada's future depends less on its design than on whether its supply chain can be rebuilt around domestic components. From a frozen parade to a robotic air, the Armada's mission list is a mirror of Russia's ambitions and its constraints. The T-14 Armata is more than a tank. It is a wager on a future where crews live in a sealed capsule, turrets fight on their own, and every armored vehicle is a node in a networked battlefield. Its missions so far, from Red Square to Kubinka to Syria, to the edges of Ukraine, are less a combat record than a decade-long stress test of an idea. If Russia can build it in numbers, the Armata rewrites armored doctrine. If it cannot, the T-14 becomes a warning about how far ambition can outrun industry. Either way, no next-generation tank will be designed anywhere in the world without asking the questions the Armata has already forced onto the table. If you want more deep dives into every mission of the world's most consequential weapons, subscribe, hit the bell, and tell us in the comments which weapon you want us to break down next.